The Afghanistan mountains had taught Alexis Morgan many things: patience, precision, the value of silence. But most importantly, they'd taught her that death often came from where you least expected it. Now, 6 weeks after her last mission in Kandahar, a mission that officially never happened, she stood watching as the CH-47 Chinook descended toward Fort Bragg's landing zone. The year was 1991. Desert Storm had officially ended, but the military machine churned on processing veterans returning from Iraq, while preparing others for whatever conflict might emerge next. Through the swirling haze of the artificial sandstorm created by the Chinook's massive rotors, figures on the tarmac squinted against the stinging wind. Some shielded their faces with weathered hands. Others simply watched with that casual predatory curiosity that spreads in places where men measure each other by what they can endure. Morgan tugged her cap lower, obscuring her features. This was the beginning of something new. A hunt that had brought her stateside under the thinnest of covers. She'd traded her customized M24 sniper rifle and ghillie suit for standard-issue gear and a logistics specialist designation. The transition chafed worse than desert sand in her boots. Colonel Andrew Steele's words echoed in her memory. "We're dealing with a ghost Morgan, someone who knows our protocols, our methods, someone hunting our people on American soil. Your cover needs to be airtight." The helicopter settled with a shudder, its rear ramp lowered like the jaw of some mechanical beast disgorging equipment and personnel into the North Carolina twilight. Morgan adjusted her oversized rucksack and fell in with the other arrivals, deliberately slouching to make her 5'2" frame appear even smaller, more unassuming. She was nearly lost beneath the oversized rucksack and layers of tactical gear that seemed to swallow her whole. Staff Sergeant Alexis Echo Morgan, barely 115 pounds in full kit, stepped onto solid ground without ceremony. The weight she carried should have bent her double, but she moved with the steady, practiced gait of someone who'd carried burdens every day of her life. Her ACU hung loose on her slender frame. Her Kevlar helmet sat awkwardly on her head, casting shadows across sharp, unreadable features. Master Sergeant James "Tank" Harrison watched from the edge of the landing zone, arms crossed over a chest built like the armored vehicle that had earned him his nickname. 2 combat tours and 20 years of service had etched permanent lines around his eyes. The Gulf War had added new ones. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, not bothering to lower his voice. "They're sending us children now." The knot of infantry soldiers near the motor pool chuckled like hyenas spotting easy prey. Private Mike Williams, 22 years old. 8 months in country. Already talking like a veteran, didn't even try to whisper. "I bet she can't even lift her own pack without help." His voice carried easily across the tarmac. "What's she gonna do if we get hit? Hide behind her rifle." Morgan heard every word. Her hearing had always been exceptional, a gift, or maybe a curse, but her face betrayed nothing. No flinch, no glare. She kept walking, each movement deliberate, economical, as though she were rationing energy for something important. What they didn't see, couldn't see, was what Morgan was actually doing as she walked past them, seemingly oblivious to their mockery. Her eyes, hidden beneath the brim of her helmet, were cataloging everything: guard tower positions, blind spots in the perimeter fence, escape routes, cover locations. She automatically calculated angles, distances, probabilities. 16 seconds to reach the south fence if necessary. That guard tower has poor visibility to the northeast. The motor pool offers both cover and weapons access. The water tower would make an excellent sniper position, clear line of sight to the main gate. 3 sentries, standard rotation. Perimeter fence has a 7-second blind spot during shift change. These calculations weren't conscious decisions. They were reflexes ingrained through years of training and experience that her file said she shouldn't have. Tank peeled a crumpled 20 from his pocket. 3 days before she's crying to go home. Any takers? 3 days. Rodriguez, a corporal with a perpetual scowl, shook his head. I say she doesn't make it through her first patrol. 20 says she asks for a transfer within 48 hours. They all laughed. The sound rolled across the tarmac like distant artillery. Hey, sweetheart, Tank called, his voice thick with condescension. Need help with that bag? Looks like it weighs more than you do. The men burst into fresh laughter. Morgan paused just long enough for Tank to catch something in her eyes. Something cold, sharp, predatory. And then it was gone. Maybe he'd imagined it. I'm fine. Thank you, she said quietly. No edge, no sarcasm, just fact. She walked on. Behind her, Williams mimicked her voice with an exaggerated high pitch and earned more laughter. The comments grew uglier, drifting into territory that soldiers in the middle of nowhere often slipped toward when boredom and arrogance mixed. In her assigned quarters, a sparse room with a metal-framed bed and a desk that had seen better decades, Morgan unpacked with surgical precision. Her gear wasn't strewn across the floor like the others. Every item had a place. Every weapon, every tool was cleaned, checked, and positioned exactly where her hand would reach for it in the dark. From a hidden compartment in her rucksack, she extracted a small metal case. Inside lay custom-machined parts that, when assembled, transformed her standard-issue M24 rifle into something far more lethal, a weapon capable of consistent sub-MOA accuracy at ranges that would make most snipers shake their heads in disbelief. The modifications weren't regulation, but then neither was she. If anyone had been watching, they might have noticed a rifle that no logistics specialist should possess. They might have wondered about the tools in her kit, things most grunts wouldn't recognize. They might have asked why she carried certain items that weren't really for hygiene at all. But no one was watching. By the time the laughter outside had faded into the night, she had her rifle assembled, the scope, adjusted, the bolt cycling smooth as silk. Through the glass, she found the distant silhouette of the barracks, where Tank and his friends were quartered. 89, she murmured. The words were barely breath. No one heard her. No one knew what the number meant. But for her, it was the sum of lives taken. Each one a mission completed. Each one a ghost that never quite left her. The Predator was already inside Forward Operating Base Bragg. She just hadn't shown her teeth. Morning came with military precision reveille at 0500, followed by the rhythmic thunder of boots hitting the ground in formation. Morgan was already awake. Had been for an hour, completing a workout routine that would have exhausted men twice her size. When she fell into formation, not a hair out of place, not a bead of sweat visible. The others glanced at her with mild surprise. Most had expected her to oversleep on her first day. Captain David Richards stood at the front of the assembly, a clipboard in hand, his face weathered by deployments and responsibility. At 42, he carried himself with the rigid posture of a man who'd spent his entire adult life in uniform. 3 patrols today, he announced, his voice carrying across the yard. Harrison, you're taking Alpha Team North. Williams Bravo sweeps the perimeter. Henderson Charlie escorts the supply convoy to Mac Hall. Morgan waited, standing at perfect attention. Richards's eyes swept over her briefly before returning to his clipboard. Morgan, inventory duty. Supply sergeant needs counts on ammo and rations in the warehouse. The smirk on Tank's face was immediate and unmistakable. Careful with those heavy boxes, Tinkerbell. Williams chimed in from 2 rows back. We should get her one of those step ladders so she can reach the top shelves. The laughter was louder this time, emboldened by daylight and the fact that Morgan had made it through the night without breaking down. Captain Richards silenced them with a look, but the damage was done. "Actually, sir," Morgan said evenly, "I'd prefer patrol duty. I'm qualified." "You're qualified to follow orders," Richards cut in. "The real soldiers handle the dangerous work." Real soldiers. The words hit harder than she expected. Still, she just nodded. "Yes, sir." She heard Tank mutter as they left, "Thank God we don't have to babysit the mascot today." The morning in the warehouse was exactly what she'd expected. Hot, stale air and the endless counting of crates, while the supply sergeant barely acknowledged her. But even here, her mind wasn't on numbers. It was on the base's vulnerabilities, the choke points, the blind angles, the ways an enemy could bleed them dry in hours. The supply sergeant, a heavy-set staff sergeant named Gaines, watched her methodically checking inventory with growing curiosity. "You handle that M4 like you know it," he remarked, noticing how she'd inspected each weapon before logging it. Morgan set down the rifle she'd been examining. "Basic training, same as everyone," Gaines snorted. "I've seen basic training graduates. They don't field strip and reassemble like that." She said nothing, moving on to the next crate of ammunition. Her fingers moved over the boxes, counting rounds while simultaneously assessing quality and manufacturing dates. "These 7 62mm rounds from Lot 37B should be pulled," she said without looking up. "Poor crimp on the casings. They'll jam in humid conditions." Gaines stared at her. "How the hell would you know that?" She gave him the practiced shrug she'd developed for moments like this. "My father taught me to shoot. He was particular about ammunition." It wasn't entirely a lie. Her father had taught her to shoot. He just hadn't been the one to teach her how to kill. By afternoon, there was at least a glimmer of purpose. Combat drills, room-clearing exercises in mock buildings. This was something she could excel at, though her partner made that nearly impossible. Williams smirked when they were paired together. "Try to keep up, sweetheart, and don't get in my way when the real work starts." The first room went fine enough. The second, not so much. He deliberately fed her wrong information about target positions, trying to trip her up. She trusted her own eyes and instincts, but the hesitation cost them seconds. And he made sure everyone knew whose fault it supposedly was. "Left corner, 2 hostiles," he whispered as they approached the third room. She knew it was wrong. Her hearing had picked up movement in the right corner, not the left. When they breached, Williams went left, leaving her to face the hostiles' training dummies rigged with paintball markers on the right alone. 2 sharp cracks, and she had paint splattered across her chest plate. "Jesus, Morgan!" Williams shouted. "I said left corner! You're going to get us killed out there!" The instructor, a battle-hardened sergeant with a face like weathered leather, shook his head. "Williams, cut the bullshit. Room clearing is about teamwork, not ego." Williams's face darkened. "All due respect, Sarge, but if she can't follow basic instructions—" "The movement was right corner, not left," Morgan said quietly. "You gave me bad intel." The room went silent. Everyone knew she was right, but no one expected her to call him on it. It became a pattern. Wrong directions, sabotaged timing, public humiliation. The breaking point came during rifle maintenance training. "Peterson," Williams called across the range, "maybe start with the basics. I don't think our little friend here knows which end the bullets come out of." More laughter. Morgan's tone stayed level. "Actually, I think your weapon hasn't been cleaned properly in weeks. That carbon buildup. I don't need some desk jockey telling me how to maintain my weapon." The shove came out of nowhere. Hard. She went down helmet skittering across the dirt. The crowd erupted in jeers. She lay there a moment, tasting dust, feeling the old heat of humiliation pressing in. And then she got up, dusted herself off, picked up her rifle, and walked toward him. "Would you like to make our next drill more interesting?" she asked. He grinned, still riding the approval of the crowd. "Bring it on, Tinkerbell." She smiled for the first time since arriving. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "I was hoping you'd say that." The interesting drill started the next morning. It wasn't part of the official schedule, just something Williams had cooked up to humiliate her again. He told the others it would be hand-to-hand warm-ups before the formal training. He didn't mention he planned to make an example out of her. They squared off in the dirt outside the barracks. A loose ring of soldiers formed around them, the mood somewhere between amusement and anticipation. Williams stretched his shoulders like a man about to toss around a rag doll. Morgan adjusted her stance with the economy of someone who'd been here before. "You ready to go crying to Suplas after this?" he asked. She didn't answer, just watched him. The instructor gave the signal. Williams launched, going for a simple shove to knock her off balance again. It didn't happen. She caught his wrist, mid-motion, shifted her weight, and used his own momentum to put him in the dirt so fast the crowd's laughter cut off mid-breath. She stepped back, giving him room to get up. He came at her harder. A wild swing this time. She ducked under it, trapped his arm, and twisted not enough to break it, but enough to make him grunt in pain and drop to one knee. "What? He gasped, but she was already moving again. Morgan's movements weren't flashy or dramatic. They were precise, economical, deadly efficient. Each motion flowed into the next with a rhythm born of thousands of hours of practice. This wasn't standard army hand-to-hand. This was something else, something taught to people who operated in shadows. 3 moves later, Williams was on his back, staring at the sky with a bleeding lip and a swelling eye. The circle around them had gone quiet, except for a low whistle from someone in the back. "Your weapon maintenance," she said calmly, as if the entire exchange had been about cleaning rifles, "should be as disciplined as your movements." The crowd didn't laugh this time. Even Tank looked at her differently, reassessing, recalculating. A slow clap broke the silence. Captain Richards stood at the edge of the circle, his expression unreadable. "Impressive, Morgan. Where exactly did logistics training teach you that?" She met his gaze evenly. "Self-defense courses, sir. A woman my size can't afford to be helpless." It was the answer she'd rehearsed, but she could tell by the slight narrowing of his eyes that he didn't quite believe it. Still, he nodded. "Report to my office at 1400. I'm reassigning you." As she walked away, she felt the shift in the air, the first tremor in the foundation of their assumptions. It wouldn't be enough to change their minds, not yet. But it was a start. 2 days later, her name came up in a briefing for an entirely different reason. The room was filled with the usual early morning fatigue. Mugs of bitter coffee steamed in the chill as Captain Richards took his position at the front. "Gentlemen," he began, his tone cutting through the haze, "meet your new nightmare." He pointed to a grainy surveillance photo tacked to the board. A figure in woodland camouflage face, hidden by a mask-long rifle at the ready. Intelligence calls him Shadow Fox. No confirmed identity, no nationality, but his work speaks for itself. 23 confirmed kills in the last 8 months. U.S. military personnel, all single shots, all from distances our best snipers say shouldn't be possible. Morgan's attention sharpened. She'd heard whispers about this man before, and in her world whispers were usually worth more than official briefings. Richards laid out the pattern of attacks. Impossible shots, psychological messages left at the scene, ambushes staged in places previously cleared. All on American soil, all targeting military targets near Fort Bragg. All with the precision of someone who knew military protocols inside and out. He leaves calling cards, Richards continued, tacking up photos of small metal fox figurines found at each scene. Psychological warfare. Each victim was tracked for days before the kill. Some reported feeling watched, but could never spot the observer. Morgan studied the photos carefully. The positioning of the bodies, the choice of firing positions, all spoke of a highly trained operator, not just a skilled shooter. Tank raised his hand. "Sir, we've dealt with snipers before. What makes this one different?" Richards didn't hesitate. "This one hunts us. Chooses the ground, controls the pace. Special forces have gone after him and come back empty-handed, or not at all." He put up another photo, a Special Forces team, their faces blurred. "Delta team went after him last month. 4 men. Only 1 came back, and he won't speak about what happened. Just repeats that the forest has eyes." The room temperature seemed to drop a few degrees. Morgan kept her face neutral, but her mind was racing, analyzing the patterns in the killings, the geography, the timing. Williams, his face still marked from their earlier lesson, asked the question no one else wanted to. "So what's the plan?" "Wait for him to come to us." "Negative," Richards said. "We believe he's setting up for a hit in the woods near Carter's Ridge. There's a high-value meeting in a cabin there, likely senior officers discussing the next phase of Gulf operations. Shadow Fox will almost certainly be providing overwatch. We need volunteers for a tracking mission. Deep woods, multiple days, high risk." Silence. Everyone knew what high risk meant when going after a sniper of this caliber. Then Morgan spoke. "I volunteer." The room shifted not in approval, but in disbelief. Tank's laugh broke the tension. "That's rich. Send Tinkerbell after Shadow Fox. Hell, maybe she can wave her magic wand at him." The laughter was uneasy this time. They'd all seen her put Williams on the ground. But this wasn't a sparring match. This was hunting one of the most dangerous snipers alive. Richards looked at her with something halfway between irritation and caution. "This isn't supply duty, Morgan. This is—" "I understand exactly what it is, sir." She met his gaze without blinking. He scanned her file again. "Your record says logistics and support. When exactly did you get experience hunting snipers?" "I'm a fast learner," Tank snorted. "This guy has killed Special Forces operators. When the shooting starts, she's going to freeze." She turned to him. "What happens when your size and noise discipline get your entire team killed before you even find him?" It landed. Tank's face flushed red. Richards cut in. "Enough. Morgan, you're in. As a spotter only. You'll be paired with Sergeant Harrison for the duration." Tank looked like he'd been ordered to carry a live grenade. Morgan simply said, "Understood." As the briefing broke up, Richards held her back. "Morgan, a word." When the room had cleared, he studied her with narrowed eyes. "I don't know what your game is, but I'm watching you. Nobody volunteers for a mission like this without a reason." She met his gaze evenly. "Maybe I just want to prove myself, sir. Or maybe there's something you're not telling me." He tapped her file. "Your combat scores are too good for someone with your background. The way you handled Williams wasn't standard Army. That was something else." For a moment, she wondered if her cover was already blown. But his next words reassured her. "I don't care what special program they pulled you from. Just don't get my men killed out there." She nodded. "Yes, sir." As she left, Morgan allowed herself a small smile. Richards was sharper than she'd given him credit for. He knew something was off about her story, but he'd drawn the wrong conclusions. Better to let him think she was some secret Pentagon experiment than know the truth. Turn. They moved out less than 48 hours later. The North Carolina wilderness swallowed sound, the dense forest carrying only the crunch of boots over fallen leaves and pine needles. Morgan brought up the rear, moving so quietly that even Tank, against his own instincts, began to notice. They'd been tracking for 8 hours following the route she'd identified in the briefing, a route Shadow Fox would likely take toward his next hide. Williams was on point when they reached the edge of a small clearing. An abandoned hunting cabin stood at its center roof, partially collapsed windows dark and empty like eye sockets. Deserted. Too deserted. Something was wrong. Tank glassed the place with his binoculars, frowning. Where the hell is everyone meeting was supposed to be underway? Morgan eased up beside him. Binoculars, she said. He hesitated, then handed them over. She scanned the rooftops, the alleyways, the details most people overlooked. A door open at the wrong angle. A curtain hanging perfectly still when there should have been a breeze. And the biggest tell, no birds. The forest around them had gone silent. He's been here, she said. Recently. Tank frowned. How can you tell? See the roof on the cabin. North corner, east side. There's a pile of leaves arranged as a shooting rest. Not there in last week's satellite photos. He squinted. I don't see it. That's because you're not looking for it. She pointed out other details, the slight disturbance in the pine needles leading to the cabin, the broken cobweb across the front door that would have been intact if no one had entered recently, the faint boot print by the water pump. The unease spread. She could feel it in the air. This wasn't a waypoint. It was bait. Tank keyed his radio. Command, this is Recon 1. Something's not right here. Meeting appears compromised. Request further instructions. Static hissed back at them. Recon 1, confirm location and status. Adjixlix clicks northeast of insertion point. Cabin in sight, no signs of friendly personnel. Possible hostile presence. More static, then proceed with caution. Verify meeting status and report back. They advanced anyway, moving with slow precision. Morgan felt the wrongness of it in her bones. The stillness, the silence, the sense of being watched. The smell hit her first inside the cabin, metallic heavy. Blood. 3 bodies lay in the main room. 2 men, 1 woman, the officers and their aide who'd been scheduled for the meeting, each with a single gunshot wound to the head, arranged for maximum psychological impact on anyone entering. Above them, a message in English scrolled on the wall in what looked like blood. Come find me, Tank muttered. Jesus Christ. Morgan's gut went cold. We need to leave. Now. Why? Because this isn't just a message. It's a setup. He knew we'd come. The whisper of fabric on stone above them was all the warning she got. Contact, she shouted, slamming into Tank just as the first shot tore through the wall where his head had been. Mud brick exploded into dust. She rolled, came up with her rifle, and fired toward the rooftop. 3 quick shots. One of the figures dropped. Snipers, multiple positions. Tank's voice was already on the radio, calling for reports. Williams and Henderson burst through the back door, weapons up. We're surrounded. From her position behind an overturned table, Morgan found another shooter in the tree line. Wind elevation making it a 300-meter challenge. Her breathing slowed. Her pulse became a metronome. 1 squeeze. The figure slumped forward. Tank stared at her like he'd just seen a ghost himself. Where the hell did you learn to? Northwest Ridge. Movement 400 meters. That's him. Even at that distance, she could tell Shadow Fox moved with purpose, controlled, dangerous. Predator, recognizing predator. For 1 frozen second, their eyes met through scopes. He fired. She was faster. Her shot hit his shoulder, twisting him sideways, sending his rifle tumbling. She cycled the bolt and fired again, but he was gone, slipping behind cover like smoke. The battlefield went quiet. The others reported in 2 of Shadow Fox's spotters dead, but the man himself was still breathing somewhere in these woods. For 15 tense minutes, they held position waiting for another attack that never came. Shadow Fox had made his point. He could have killed them all, but had chosen not to. This was a message, not an endgame. Tank looked at her, something like respect settling into his features. "We're going to have to talk about your service record." She didn't look up from her scope. "Later. Right now we track him before he finds friends." Why did silence feel heavier than gunfire? The firefight was over, but the air still carried its taste, burnt powder dust, and something metallic that clung to the back of the throat. For 2 hours, they searched following the blood trail that snaked away from the cabin and up into the jagged highlands. Each crimson smear on stone pulled them forward. But the man they hunted had vanished like mist. By the time the Chinook roared in for extraction, the team was drained. Henderson limped with a shallow graze across his calf. Murphy's hand shook from the adrenaline dump. Williams kept scanning the ridgeline even as they boarded, as if Shadow Fox might appear for one last shot. Morgan sat in the back, her rifle stripped open in her lap. Each piece was cleaned and inspected with a rhythm that felt almost meditative. The others kept glancing at her when they thought she wasn't looking. Something had shifted. Tank sat across from her, his massive frame hunched forward, elbows on knees. His eyes kept going back to the image of her in the firefight, calm, precise, lethal. That hadn't been luck. That had been skill born from years, not months. He finally spoke over the thrum of the rotors. "Morgan, that shooting back there." He trailed off, searching for the right words. "Where exactly did you learn to shoot like that?" "Practice," she said without looking up from the bolt assembly. Williams leaned in, his bruised face still puffy from their earlier lesson. "Practice my ass. I've been shooting since I was 12 and I couldn't make those shots on my best day. That was something else." "I had good instructors." Tank frowned. "Your file says logistics and support. Where the hell did you find time for good instructors?" For a moment, she considered telling them, just saying it out loud. But operational security wasn't a suggestion. It was the spine of her existence. Break it, and it wasn't just her own life at risk. "I spent time on the range whenever I could," she said instead. Richards, who'd been monitoring the radio, pulled off his headset. "Morgan, I've seen range shooters, and I've seen competition marksmen. What you did wasn't either of those. That was combat precision under fire. You move like someone who's done this before." Her eyes met his. "Done what before?" "Killed people," Richards said flatly. "You didn't hesitate, didn't flinch. No stress reactions. You moved like a veteran." The inside of the helicopter went still. The rhythmic thump of the rotors seemed louder now. Every man on that bird was watching her, waiting for an answer she couldn't give. "Sometimes people surprise you," she said finally. Tank shook his head. "No, I've been in the Army 12 years. I know the difference between beginner's luck and professional competence. What I saw was professional competence." Henderson spoke up from the rear. "Spotting the shooting rest, knowing it was a trap, calling sniper positions, that's not something you learn from books." Morgan slid the clean bolt back into her rifle. "I observe. I pay attention to details." Williams scoffed. "Details? I was looking at the same damn cabin and didn't see any of it." "Maybe you weren't looking hard enough," she said, her voice level, but edged. He flushed. "Or maybe you've got experience you're not talking about." She set the rifle down and looked at him not with anger, but with a kind of calm that felt more dangerous. Maybe you should focus on your own story and let me worry about mine. Tank leaned back, the pieces starting to fall into place in his mind. Her constant scanning on day one, the way she'd mapped the base without seeming to the hand-to-hand lesson she'd given Williams, now the kind of marksmanship that didn't just happen. "You're not who you say you are," he said finally. She held his gaze, something calculating flickering in her eyes. "I'm exactly who I say I am." Staff Sergeant Alexis Morgan, assigned to Fort Bragg for logistics support. Richards muttered, "Logistics personnel don't move like you move today. They don't shoot like you shot, and they sure as hell don't read a battlefield like that." Her voice changed then, not louder but different, the tone of someone who'd been in command before, who'd given orders in places where disobedience meant death. "What you saw was a soldier doing her job under fire. Nothing more, nothing less." "And what job is that exactly?" Tank asked. "The same as everyone else on this base, keeping our forces alive and completing the mission." It wasn't really an answer, but the way she said it shut down further questions. The men exchanged silent looks, the kind soldiers use when they recognize they've hit a wall. The helicopter began its descent, the base rising up through the dust below. Morgan was the first one off her gear, shouldered stride steady toward the debriefing area. "Morgan," Tank called after her. She stopped, turned. "Whatever your story is, what you did today saved our lives. We won't forget that." She nodded once, then walked on. By the time they reached the compound, rumors were already spreading, not just about the firefight, but about the quiet support clerk who had dropped 3 enemy combatants with impossible shots. Curiosity replaced mockery in the eyes that followed her across the yard. In the debriefing room, Captain Richards sat across from her, her service file open on the table. He tapped it with a pen. "Expert marksmanship scores from basic," he said. "Nothing that explains today. All your assignments are rear echelon support. So help me understand. How does a supply clerk develop the tactical awareness to read an ambush site and the skills to make those shots?" Before she could speak, the door swung open. Colonel Andrew Steele strode in like a storm front, 6 feet of coiled intensity, in a perfectly pressed uniform, silver eagles gleaming on his collar. The kind of man who looked like he'd been forged rather than born. "Captain, I need to speak with Staff Sergeant Morgan immediately." Richards rose from his chair. "With respect, sir, we're in the middle of—" "The debriefing is over," Steele cut in, his eyes locked on hers, and she saw it instantly. Recognition. "Staff Sergeant, you're coming with me." Richards didn't back down. "Sir, I have a right to know what kind of soldier I'm commanding." Steele stopped at the door and turned back. "Captain, what clearance do you hold, secret, sir?" "Then you don't have the clearance to know what kind of soldier you're commanding." The words dropped like a stone in the room. She followed Steele out into the sunlight. Soldiers stopped mid-conversation to watch them pass, whispers chasing in their wake. By the time they reached the command bunker, there was a small crowd lingering near the main briefing room. Inside, Steele secured the door and moved to a terminal, entering a sequence of codes before pulling a thick manila folder from a safe. The classification stamps alone were enough to make Richards's secret clearance look like a library card. He began reading Staff Sergeant Alexis Echo Morgan. Call sign Ghost 7, 75th Ranger Regiment, 2nd Battalion Special Operations. 2 tours, Afghanistan 1, Iraq with JSOC. Graduated top of class at U.S. Army Sniper School, Fort Benning. Advanced Urban Warfare with British SAS. Counter-sniper certification with FBI Hostage Rescue Team. He looked up. Combat record Operation Eagle Claw 43 confirmed kills. Operation Desert Storm 28, Operation Just Cause 18. 12 of those were high-value targets. He paused. 89 confirmed kills in total. Morgan's voice was calm when she spoke. That was before today, sir. Outside, the hallway had gone quiet. The crowd pressed close enough to hear every word. Steele closed the folder. For the past 3 months, you've been under deep cover as a logistics specialist gathering intelligence on Shadow Fox and his network. Today's engagement was not chance. It was the culmination of that operation. Her posture shifted, then the cover persona dropping like a shed skin. She stood straighter. The quiet clerk was gone. Shadow Fox is wounded but still operational, she said. Request permission to finish the mission. Granted, but your cover is blown. From this point forward, you operate under your true identity and rank. Steele stepped to the door and swung it open. The soldiers outside stared at her men who had dismissed her, mocked her, bet money on her failure. Now their faces were a mix of awe, shame, and something close to fear. Gentlemen, Steele said, meet Staff Sergeant Alexis Morgan. Call sign Ghost 7, one of the most effective counter-snipers in the U.S. military today. She eliminated 3 enemy combatants and saved your patrol team. I suggest you adjust your attitudes accordingly. She let her eyes sweep over them, not with gloating, but with the cool detachment of someone who didn't need their approval. The mission continues, she said simply. Shadow Fox is still out there. Anyone who wants to help is welcome. Anyone who doesn't stay out of my way. In her quarters that night, Morgan sat alone staring at a photograph she'd kept hidden in her gear. A man in desert camouflage rifle slung across his chest, standing beside a younger version of herself. Her mentor, the one who'd taught her that size didn't matter when you could put a bullet through a man's eye at 1,000 meters. The most dangerous person in the room isn't always the one making the most noise, he'd told her. Sometimes it's the one no one notices until it's too late. She put the photo away and assembled her rifle again. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow she wouldn't be invisible anymore. For better or worse, Ghost 7 had stepped out of the shadows, and Shadow Fox was waiting. The night after her cover was blown, Fort Bragg hummed with whispered conversations. Men who had laughed at Morgan just days before now spoke her call sign with something approaching reverence. Ghost 7. In the mess hall, soldiers who wouldn't meet her eyes before now stared openly, measuring themselves against a legend they hadn't recognized. Some avoided her entirely. Others watched with newfound respect. A few, like Tank, seemed caught between shame and curiosity. Morgan sat alone, her tray untouched, studying satellite imagery of the surrounding forests on a tablet. The same forests where Shadow Fox was now nursing a wound she'd inflicted. She marked terrain features, calculated ranges, noted potential hide positions. The work kept her hands busy, while her mind processed the new reality. Her carefully constructed identity had been blown open. 3 months of methodical patient work, observing personnel, studying patterns, building the trap, now accelerated to a direct confrontation. It wasn't how she preferred to operate, but sometimes the hunter had to adapt when the prey sensed the snare. Colonel Steele's voice cut through her thoughts. Ghost 7. She looked up. He stood at the edge of her table, straight-backed, and severe as always, a thin folder in his hand. She started to rise, but he motioned her back down and took a seat across from her. At ease, Morgan. He placed the folder between them, tapping it with one finger. Shadow Fox's latest intelligence. There's something you need to see. She opened it, scanning the contents with practiced efficiency. Surveillance photos, field reports, forensic analyses from the ambush scene. But what caught her attention was a small plastic evidence bag containing a tarnished bronze medallion, a stylized fox head with sharp, knowing eyes. "He left this for you." Steele's voice was flat. "Had your call sign etched on the back." Morgan turned the medallion over. There it was, Ghost 7, carved in precise letters. Something cold settled in her stomach. "He knows who I am." "Yes, and that changes everything." Steele leaned forward, lowering his voice. "We've been tracking this bastard for almost a year. 23 confirmed kills, all military personnel, all highly trained. But you're the first he's ever singled out." He's making it personal. Or it already was. Steele studied her face. "Is there something I should know, Morgan? Any reason why Shadow Fox might have a particular interest in you?" She kept her expression neutral, weighing how much to reveal. "No, sir, not that I'm aware of." Steele's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing the partial truth, but he didn't press. "We're accelerating the timetable. You'll head the hunter-killer team. Pick your personnel, full operational authority, whatever you need." "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet." He stood adjusting his uniform with habitual precision. "Debrief in my office, RO 600, tomorrow. We'll go over the full operation plan." As he walked away, Morgan turned the medallion over in her palm, studying the fox's face. There was something familiar in the craftsmanship, something that tugged at the edges of her memory. She slipped it into her pocket and returned to her satellite maps, but her concentration was broken. The past was reaching forward, trying to pull her back into its grasp. The dreams came that night, as they often did, before a mission. She's 13 again, small and scared, hiding in the crawl space beneath the floorboards of her father's study. The house in Lebanon, where they've been living under diplomatic cover. Her father, officially a cultural attaché, unofficially CIA, is being torn apart, room by room. Voices shout in Arabic. Furniture crashes. Glass shatters. Through the cracks between the boards, she watches her father's feet as he stands facing the door, waiting. He knew they were coming. Had time only to hide her before they arrived. The door splinters inward. New feet enter combat boots, purposeful strides. "Hello, Michael." The voice speaks English with an American accent. "Didn't expect to see me again, did you?" "You're making a mistake." Her father's voice is steady, betraying nothing of the fear she knows he must feel. "The only mistake was trusting you with Blackbird." A pause. "Where are the files?" "I don't know what you're talking about." A short, bitter laugh. "Always the company man. Right to the end." The gunshot is deafening in the confined space. Her father's body crumples to the floor, eyes staring sightlessly through the crack, looking directly at her hiding place. Blood seeps between the floorboards, dripping onto her cheek. The man kneels, his face now visible through the gap. Younger then, but unmistakable. Andrew Steele. "Check the rest of the house," he orders. "Find the daughter, no witnesses." She bites her hand to keep from screaming as the boots move methodically through the house. They never find her. Hours later, when the house is silent and dark, another man comes. Captain James Waters, her father's friend. The one who'd taught her to shoot during the long afternoons when her father was away on business. He finds her still hiding, covered in her father's dried blood. "I'm going to get you out of here, Alexis," he whispers. "But you have to be absolutely silent. Can you do that?" She nods, 13 years old, and already learning that survival sometimes means becoming a ghost. As he lifts her from the hiding place, her father's lifeless eyes seem to follow her. She makes a promise to him, then one she will carry for the rest of her life. "I'll find who did this. I promise, Daddy. I'll make it right." Morgan woke with a start. sheets damp with sweat, the ghost of her father's blood still warm on her face. The digital clock read 03:17, too early to start the day, too late to hope for more rest. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed and reached for the medallion on her nightstand. In the dim light, the fox's eyes seemed to watch her, knowing and mocking. The pieces were starting to fit together. Shadow Fox's targets, his methods, his apparent knowledge of classified operations. It wasn't random. It was methodical, purposeful, just like her own hunt had been for all these years. She dressed quickly and slipped out of her quarters. The base was quiet at this hour, the darkness broken only by security lights casting long shadows across the parade ground. Perfect cover for a ghost who didn't want to be seen. Morgan made her way to the Secure Intelligence Center, using her newly granted clearance to access the classified terminal. If her suspicions were correct, she needed proof before taking the next step. 4 hours later, when the sun began painting the eastern sky with threads of gold, she had her answer. And it changed everything. Absolutely not. Colonel Steele's voice was flat, brooking no argument. Harrison and Williams were part of the team that was ambushed. They're compromised. Morgan stood her ground, hands clasped behind her back, in the center of Steele's office. With respect, sir, that's precisely why I want them. They've seen Shadow Fox's tactics firsthand. They know what we're up against. They're not special operations qualified. Neither were most of the men I served with in Afghanistan before I trained them. Now they're some of the best operators in country. She paused. I need people I can mold to the mission requirements, not people set in their ways. Steele studied her fingers steepled beneath his chin. And the real reason, sir, you and I both know there's a leak at this base. Someone feeding information to Shadow Fox. His eyes narrowed. Are you suggesting one of my Special Forces operators is the mole? Morgan chose her words carefully. I'm suggesting that fresh eyes are less likely to be compromised. Harrison, Williams, Henderson for comms, and Diaz for tracking. That's my team. The colonel was silent for a long moment, weighing options, calculating risks. Finally, he nodded once sharply. Approved. But they're your responsibility, Ghost 7. If they can't keep up, that's on you. Understood, sir. Good. Now, the operation plan. He spread a map across his desk. Shadow Fox has been operating primarily in this 20-square-mile area. Remote minimal civilian presence, excellent sight lines for long-range engagements. He knows the terrain better than we do, which gives him a significant advantage. Morgan leaned over the map, studying the contours. So we change the terrain. Explain. We don't hunt him where he's comfortable. We draw him to us. She pointed to a location on the map. The abandoned munitions depot here. Enclosed space, limited long-range positions. It neutralizes his advantage. And how do you propose to lure one of the deadliest snipers in the world into a confined space? Morgan met his gaze steadily. We give him something he can't resist. A high-value target. Understanding dawned in Steele's eyes. You're proposing to use yourself as bait. Not exactly. She traced a route on the map. We leak information about a classified convoy, something big enough to draw his attention. When he moves to intercept, we'll be waiting. Steele frowned. If there's a mole in the ranks, how do we ensure the right information gets out without compromising the real operation? We don't tell anyone the full plan. Each team member gets only the information they need for their specific role. Compartmentalization. Classic tradecraft. Something like approval flickered across Steele's face. Very well, Ghost 7. The operation is yours to run. You have 72 hours to prepare your team. After that, I want Shadow Fox eliminated." "Yes, sir." As Morgan turned to leave, Steele called after her, "Morgan, one more thing." She paused at the door. "If there's anything about Shadow Fox, anything at all, that might be relevant to this mission now, would be the time to share it." Their eyes locked across the room. For a moment, Morgan considered telling him everything, her suspicions about Shadow Fox's identity, the pattern she'd discovered in his kills, the connection to her own past. But the image of her father's blood seeping through floorboards held her tongue. "Nothing relevant, sir. Just a sniper, doing what snipers do." She closed the door behind her, feeling Steele's gaze boring into her back long after she'd left his sight. The four men stood at rigid attention in the small briefing room, faces betraying varying degrees of confusion and unease. Tank's expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes tracked Morgan's every movement as she entered. Williams looked like he'd been called to the principal's office, uncertain whether to expect punishment or reward. Henderson and Diaz simply waited, professional and attentive. Morgan took her position at the front of the room, letting the silence stretch for a calculated moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was different from the one they'd grown accustomed to, sharper, more commanding, stripped of the deliberate softness she'd affected as part of her cover. "Gentlemen, I've selected each of you for a specialized hunter-killer team with one objective: eliminate Shadow Fox. This mission is classified top secret. Nothing we discuss leaves this room." She looked each man in the eye. "Questions so far?" Tank cleared his throat. "Permission to speak freely, Sergeant. Granted. Why us? There are Spec Ops teams better qualified for this kind of mission." A fair question. She'd expected it. "Because you've seen him operate. Because you weren't chosen for your existing skills, but for your potential to learn new ones. And because I need people who will follow orders without questioning them, even when those orders don't make sense." Williams shifted uncomfortably. "No offense, Sergeant, but we don't exactly have a lot of experience hunting elite snipers. Which is why, starting today, you're going to receive the most intensive training of your careers." Morgan's tone left no room for debate. "By the time we deploy, you'll be ready." She activated the projector, displaying a grainy surveillance photo of Shadow Fox. "Our target is highly trained, methodical, and patient. He chooses his ground carefully and has extensive knowledge of military protocols. What makes him especially dangerous is his ability to predict our movements." Diaz spoke up for the first time. "You think he has inside information. I know he does. There's a leak somewhere in this base, someone feeding him intel on operations, personnel movements, security protocols." She let that sink in. "Which is why this team operates on a need-to-know basis. Each of you will receive only the information required for your specific task. So we don't trust each other." Henderson's usually placid features tightened with concern. "You trust me. I trust you. But information is compartmentalized for everyone's protection." Morgan laid out the basic framework of the operation: the false convoy, the ambush site, the roles each man would play. She deliberately omitted key details that would come later, once she was certain of their loyalty and capabilities. "Training begins in 1 hour. Bring full gear, including winter weather kit. It's going to be a long 3 days, gentlemen." As they filed out, Tank lingered behind. When the others had gone, he turned to her. "I need to know something," he said quietly. "That day in the woods when we encountered Shadow Fox, you knew exactly where to look. You anticipated his movements like you'd done it before." Morgan met his gaze evenly. "Your point, Sergeant Harrison. Have you faced this guy before? Is that why Colonel Steele brought you in?" She considered her answer carefully. "I was brought in because hunting snipers is my specialty, nothing more." Tank studied her face, searching for the truth behind her words. "All right. But if there's something about this mission, you're not telling us something that might keep us alive out there, I hope you'll reconsider." After he left, Morgan stood alone in the briefing room staring at the projected image of Shadow Fox. The distance and poor quality obscured his features, but she didn't need to see his face to know who hid behind that mask. Some ghosts you never forgot. The training ground was a remote section of Fort Bragg's extensive backcountry, densely wooded, hilly terrain, perfect for practicing the art of invisibility. Morgan had requisitioned the area for 3 days, with strict orders that no other personnel were to enter without her explicit authorization. She pushed her small team mercilessly, starting before dawn and continuing well after sunset. They learned to move silently through dense undergrowth, to read the subtle signs of a sniper's passage, to establish fields of fire and escape routes. She taught them how to think like their quarry, how to anticipate where Shadow Fox would position himself, how to counter his likely tactics. Most importantly, she taught them patience, the hardest lesson for soldiers accustomed to direct action. "The average engagement lasts less than 3 seconds, she told them as they lay prone in the freezing mud, ghillie suits blending with the forest floor. "But the hunt that leads to that moment can last days, sometimes weeks. You win or lose long before you pull the trigger." Williams, whose cocky attitude had been the first casualty of their training, adjusted his scope with fingers stiff from cold. "How do you do it?" "Just wait for so long. You become part of the environment. You let go of yourself, your discomfort, your impatience, your ego. There's only the mission." Tank, watching through his spotting scope, grunted. "Easier said than done." "Nothing worth doing is easy, Sergeant." Morgan checked her watch. "Diaz should be reaching his position now. Let's see if you can spot him." All 4 men scanned the ridge 600 meters away. Minutes ticked by. No one saw anything. "There's nothing there," Henderson finally said. Morgan handed Tank her binoculars. "Center of the ridgeline. Fallen oak, 2 rocks to the right." Tank adjusted his focus. "Son of a—" He trailed off, impressed, despite himself. "I wouldn't have seen him in a month of looking." "That's the idea. Diaz has a natural talent for this. The rest of you need to develop it." She took back the binoculars. "Shadow Fox has been doing this longer than any of you. He's better at it than any of you. Our only advantage is that there are 5 of us and 1 of him." The training continued relentlessly. By the 2nd day, the men were exhausted, pushed beyond what they thought were their limits. Morgan drove them harder still, knowing that real combat would demand even more. On the afternoon of the 2nd day, she paired them for tactical exercises, Tank with Henderson, Williams with Diaz, while she observed correcting mistakes, reinforcing successes. During a brief rest period, Tank approached her, his massive frame somehow less imposing after 48 hours of being humbled by the petite woman who seemed impervious to fatigue. "Got a minute, Sergeant?" She nodded, and they walked a short distance from the others. "My brother was a sniper," Tank said without preamble. 82nd Airborne, served in Desert Storm." Morgan said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "He was killed 3 months ago. Precision shot from over a kilometer away. No one saw the shooter." Tank's voice remained steady, but his eyes betrayed the pain. "The brass called it an unfortunate incident. Friendly fire during a training exercise, but there was something off about the whole thing." The pieces clicked into place in Morgan's mind. Tank's initial hostility, his reluctance to accept her, his lingering suspicion, all made sense now. "You think Shadow Fox killed your brother?" It wasn't a question. "I know he did." Tank's eyes hardened. "The timing fits. The method fits. And Eric wasn't just any soldier. He was investigating something before he died. something classified that had him spooked. Morgan weighed her response carefully. What was he investigating? He never said exactly. Operational security. But he mentioned a code name once. Tank looked directly at her. Blackbird. The name hit Morgan like a physical blow, though she kept her expression neutral. Blackbird. The same operation her father had been involved with before his death. The same operation she'd spent years trying to unravel. Does Colonel Steele know about this? Tank shook his head. I tried to bring it up once. He shut me down hard, said Eric's death was being handled by a different department, and I should focus on my duties. Morgan filed this information away, another piece in the increasingly complex puzzle. I'm sorry about your brother, Tank, truly. But right now, I need you focused on the mission. That's just it. He lowered his voice. This is my mission too. Has been since Eric died. I volunteered for every patrol, every operation that might lead to Shadow Fox. It's why I was out there that day when you found us. Understanding dawned. That's why you were so hostile. You thought I was interfering with your hunt. A humorless smile flickered across his face. Something like that. Turns out, you're a hell of a lot better at this than I am. I've had more practice. Tank studied her for a long moment. You know more about Shadow Fox than you're saying. I can see it in your eyes when we discuss the mission. She neither confirmed nor denied it. We all have our ghosts, Sergeant Harrison. Some are just more persistent than others. They rejoined the group, the conversation apparently over. But something had shifted between them, a tentative trust forming around shared purpose, if not shared information. That night, as the team slept in their makeshift camp, Morgan slipped away to review the intelligence she'd gathered. She spread the files on the ground inside her small tent, connecting the dots that no one else had seen. Shadow Fox's victims weren't random. They all had one thing in common: connection to Operation Blackbird, a classified program from the mid-1980s. The same program her father had been involved with. The same program that had cost him his life. And at the center of it all, one name kept appearing: Colonel Andrew Steele. Morgan traced the pattern of kills, the dates, the locations. Shadow Fox was working his way methodically through a list. A list that, if her suspicions were correct, would eventually lead to Steele himself. She pulled out an old creased photograph herself at 20, standing beside a tall, lean man with intense eyes and an easy smile. Marcus Reed, her spotter during sniper school, her partner on 3 high-risk deployments. The man who'd saved her life in Kandahar, only to disappear on a black operation 6 months later. The man declared killed in action, his body never recovered. The man who might now be hunting the same people she had spent years investigating. Morgan tucked the photo away as a twig snapped outside her tent. Her hand moved automatically to her sidearm. Sergeant, Williams's voice pitched low. Henderson spotted movement at the perimeter. Might be nothing but... She was on her feet instantly, files quickly secured in her pack. Wake the others. Quiet alert. The team assembled silently, weapons ready, moving with the coordination that came from intense training. They spread out, each taking a sector, communicating with hand signals, illuminated by the faint moonlight filtering through the trees. Morgan scanned the darkness, senses heightened. Something wasn't right. The forest was too quiet, the air too still. They were being watched. A flash of metal caught the moonlight just for an instant. But enough. Morgan signaled the team to hold position and moved forward alone, each step placed with deliberate care. 20 meters into the brush, she found a small metal fox identical to the medallion Steele had shown her, placed deliberately on a fallen log. Pinned beneath it was a note written in a hand she would have recognized anywhere. Some ghosts don't stay buried, Echo. Do you still remember what we promised in Kandahar? Morgan's breath caught in her throat. Only one person had ever called her Echo in the field. Only one person knew what had happened in Kandahar, what they had sworn to each other while waiting for extraction under heavy fire. Marcus Reed, Shadow Fox. He was confirming what she had already suspected, and he was watching them right now close enough to have placed this message while her team slept. She pocketed the note and the fox figurine, then signaled the all-clear to her team. Whatever game Reed was playing, she wouldn't expose her suspicions to the others. Not yet. Not until she understood why the man who had once been her closest ally was now targeting the very institution they had both sworn to protect. The final day of training dawned cold and clear. Morgan pushed the team even harder, knowing that their lives and her ability to confront Reed on her own terms depended on their readiness. They ran tactical scenarios, rehearsed the convoy interception plan, practiced emergency extraction protocols. By late afternoon, even Tank was showing signs of fatigue, his movements slowing, his reactions dulled by exhaustion. Morgan called a halt. "That's enough for today. We deploy at Euro 400 tomorrow. Get some rest." As the men packed up their gear, she took Williams aside. The youngest and most impulsive of the group, he had nonetheless shown remarkable improvement over the 3 days. "You've done good work, Williams. Your marksmanship has improved significantly." He looked startled by the praise. "Thank you, Sergeant. There's something I need you to do tomorrow. Something I can't ask the others." Wariness flickered across his face. "What kind of something?" "I need you to watch Colonel Steele." Williams's eyes widened. "Sir, not for the reasons you're thinking." She kept her voice low, ensuring they wouldn't be overheard. "There's a leak on this base. Someone feeding information to Shadow Fox. I need to know if the Colonel communicates with anyone about our operation after we deploy." "You think Colonel Steele is the leak?" Disbelief colored his tone. "I think we can't rule anyone out. That's why I'm assigning you to Headquarters Communication Detail. You'll be our liaison with Command, which gives you the perfect opportunity to observe without raising suspicion." Williams hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the assignment. "With all due respect, Sergeant, if you suspect the Colonel of whatever this is, shouldn't we report it up the chain? And who exactly would we report it to?" William Steele is the chain of command for this operation. He had no answer for that. "I'm not asking you to spy on a superior officer," Morgan continued, softening her tone slightly. "I'm asking you to be observant. Note who he talks to, what information he shares. That's all." After a moment, Williams nodded. "Yes, Sergeant. Good. Keep this between us for now." She clapped him on the shoulder and moved away, leaving him with his thoughts. It was a risk involving Williams this way. But she needed eyes on Steele, and the young soldier's assignment as communications liaison provided the perfect cover. Besides, if her suspicions about Reed's motivations were correct, they were all at risk from forces far more dangerous than a rogue sniper. That evening, as the team made final preparations for the next day's mission, Morgan conducted one last intelligence review. The plan was solid. A fake convoy would depart at 0700, traveling a route that had been subtly leaked through channels Shadow Fox was known to monitor. The real operation would involve Morgan's team moving into pre-selected positions around the abandoned munitions depot where they expected Shadow Fox to establish his hide. If all went according to plan, they would intercept him before he could take a shot at the convoy. If not, well, Morgan had contingencies for that too. She was checking her custom M24 rifle one final time when Tank approached his own gear, ready for the morning deployment. "Mind if I ask you something, Sergeant?" Morgan continued her inspection, hands moving with practiced efficiency over the weapon. Go ahead. Why did you pick me for this team? Really? She looked up, meeting his gaze. Because you have personal stakes in this mission. That makes you motivated in a way the others aren't. Because of Eric. Yeah. She set the rifle down. And because despite your initial attitude, you're a solid soldier with good instincts. You adapt quickly. You follow orders even when you don't agree with them. Hank absorbed this with a slow nod. There's something else you should know. About my brother. Morgan waited. The night before he was killed, he called me, said he'd discovered something big, something that went all the way back to Lebanon in '85. Tank watched her face carefully. Said it involved a CIA officer named Morgan who was executed for selling secrets. The air seemed to freeze in Morgan's lungs. For a moment, she couldn't speak, couldn't move. My father was CIA, she finally said, her voice carefully controlled. He was stationed in Lebanon. He was killed in 1985. He wasn't a traitor. Understanding dawned in Tank's eyes. That's why you're really here. This isn't just about Shadow Fox for you. The mission remains the same, Sergeant. Eliminate the target. But the target isn't who Steele thinks it is it? Morgan didn't answer directly. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. As Tank walked away, Morgan felt the weight of the past pressing down on her shoulders. The careful compartmentalization she'd maintained for years was starting to fracture. Too many connections, too many coincidences. Her father, Reed, Blackbird, Steele. They were all pieces of a puzzle she'd been trying to solve since she was 13 years old, hiding beneath floorboards as her father's blood dripped onto her face. Tomorrow would bring her face to face with at least one of those ghosts. And perhaps, finally, some answers. The mission began in pre-dawn darkness, the team moving out in 2 specially modified Humvees with minimal markings. Morgan rode with Tank and Henderson, while Diaz transported their specialized equipment in the second vehicle. Williams had already departed for his assignment at command headquarters. They traveled in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, mentally preparing for what lay ahead. The abandoned munitions depot was 30 miles from base, deep, in a restricted training area rarely used since the Cold War. The perfect killing ground, isolated, contained with limited approaches that could be monitored and controlled. As they neared the location, Morgan reviewed the plan one final time. Tank, you and Henderson set up at the north entrance. Cover the main approach road and the ridge line to the east. Diaz, you're with me at the south position. We'll establish primary sniper hide and observation post. Tank checked his weapon, a standard M4 carbine with a tactical scope, and nodded. Rules of engagement. Capture if possible. Lethal force authorized if necessary. Morgan met his eyes briefly. But I want him alive if we can manage it. The unspoken question hung in the air. Why would she want a deadly sniper who had killed 23 Americans taken alive? But Tank didn't voice it. They reached the outer perimeter of the depot at 0530, well ahead of schedule. Morgan signaled for the vehicles to halt a kilometer out, continuing the rest of the way on foot to avoid detection. The team moved silently through the dense forest, weapons ready, senses alert for any sign of their quarry. The depot itself was a sprawling complex of concrete bunkers and rusted metal buildings surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Nature had begun reclaiming the site. Vines crawled up walls, saplings pushed through cracked pavement, and small animals scurried among the debris of a forgotten military outpost. Morgan directed Tank and Henderson to their position with hand signals, then led Diaz toward the southern approach. They found an ideal vantage point in an abandoned guard tower that overlooked both the main compound and the access road. As Diaz set up their equipment, spotting, scope, rangefinder, weather instruments, Morgan swept the area with her binoculars, searching for any sign that Shadow Fox had already arrived. Nothing. But that didn't mean he wasn't there. A man like Reed could disappear in plain sight when he wanted to. "All positions check in," she whispered into her comm unit. "North team in position," Tank's voice came back equally soft. "No movement. Sight appears clear." "Command confirms convoy departed on schedule," Williams reported from headquarters. "ETA to target zone 90 minutes." Morgan acknowledged both reports and settled in to wait, her rifle positioned perfectly. Her body relaxed despite the tension humming through her veins. This was the part of sniping most people couldn't handle: the stillness, the patience, the ability to remain absolutely focused while doing nothing but watching and waiting. Minutes stretched into an hour. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist, illuminating the depot in harsh detail. Still no sign of Shadow Fox. "Movement," Diaz murmured suddenly. "Southeast ridge, 800 meters." Morgan shifted her scope fractionally, scanning the indicated area. For several seconds, she saw nothing. Then a shadow moving between trees, just a flicker of darkness where none should be. "I see it," she confirmed. "Could be local wildlife." "Too big, too deliberate." Diaz adjusted his spotting scope. "Human, moving toward the east entrance." Morgan relayed the information to Tank's team. "Hold positions. Let him come to us." The shadow disappeared into the tree line. Minutes passed with no further sighting. "I don't like this," Tank's voice crackled over the comm. "If he's spotted the observation post, he could be circling around behind us." Morgan considered the possibilities. Shadow Fox Reed was too good to be spotted this easily unless he wanted to be. Which meant, "It's a diversion," she realized aloud. "North team, check your 6 immediately." The comm erupted with sudden movement and cursing. "Contact," Henderson's voice urgent but controlled. "Single shooter moving west through the underbrush. Lost visual." "He's hunting us now," Diaz said quietly. Morgan made a quick decision. "Change of plans. North team fall back to the secondary position. Diaz maintain overwatch here. I'm moving to intercept." "Sergeant, that's not the plan," Tank began. "Plans change. Execute." Without waiting for a response, Morgan slipped from the guard tower and moved into the forest, her ghillie suit blending with the undergrowth. This was her element, the silent stalk predator becoming prey, becoming predator again. If Reed wanted to play cat and mouse, she would oblige him, but she would do it on her terms. She moved like a ghost through the trees, each step placed with deliberate care, her breathing controlled, her senses hyper-alert. The forest spoke to her in a language few understood, the subtle shift of a branch, indicating recent passage, the unnatural stillness of birds, warning of a predator's presence, the faint impressions in soft earth, revealing direction and speed. Morgan followed these signs, reading the story of Shadow Fox's movement. He was good, better than most, but she had been trained by the best, and some things couldn't be completely concealed. After 20 minutes of careful tracking, she caught a glimpse of movement ahead, a figure in advanced camouflage moving with the same calculated precision she employed herself. The figure paused, kneeling to examine something on the ground. Morgan raised her rifle, the scope bringing the target into crystal clarity. Even with his face partially obscured by tactical gear, she recognized him instantly. Marcus Reed. Older, harder, a jagged scar running from temple to jaw that hadn't been there before, but unmistakably the man who had once been her partner and friend. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger. At this range, less than 200 meters, it would be an easy shot. Clean. Final. But she needed answers more than she needed a kill. Morgan keyed her comm unit, keeping her voice just above a whisper. "Target acquired. South Section Grid Coordinate Delta 7, holding position. Copy that, Tank responded, moving to support. Reed's head snapped up at that moment, as if he had heard the transmission despite the distance. His eyes scanned the forest, coming to rest almost exactly where Morgan lay concealed. A slow, deliberate smile spread across his face. He raised one hand in a gesture she recognized from their days operating together. I see you. Then he was moving faster than seemed possible, disappearing into the dense undergrowth. Morgan swore under her breath and pursued, abandoning stealth for speed. This wasn't how the confrontation was supposed to happen. But Reed was forcing her hand, drawing her away from the team, creating the opportunity for a private reckoning. She lost sight of him almost immediately, but continued in the direction he had been moving, trusting her instincts. The forest thinned as she approached a small clearing surrounding one of the depot's outlying storage bunkers. A concrete structure half buried in the hillside, its heavy metal door hanging open on rusted hinges. Morgan paused at the tree line, scanning the area carefully. This was exactly the kind of place Reed would choose for an ambush, limited approaches, good cover, multiple escape routes. North Team, what's your position? She whispered into her comm. Static answered her. The comms were down, either due to the terrain or deliberate jamming. She was on her own. Taking a deep breath, Morgan advanced toward the bunker, moving from cover to cover, rifle ready. Every instinct screamed that she was walking into a trap, but sometimes the only way to disarm a trap was to trigger it. The interior of the bunker was cool, and dark dust motes dancing in the thin shafts of sunlight that penetrated through cracks in the concrete ceiling. Empty shelves lined the walls, remnants of the military supplies once stored here. And sitting on an overturned crate in the center of the room, rifle propped casually beside him, was Marcus Reed. "Hello, Echo," he said, his voice exactly as she remembered it. "It's been a long time." Morgan kept her weapon trained on him, maintaining a safe distance. 6 years, 2 months, and 14 days. But who's counting? A smile flickered across his scarred face. Still precise as ever. You've been busy since Kandahar. 23 kills, all military personnel. 23 traitors, he corrected, all connected to Blackbird. The name hung in the air between them, heavy with shared history and unspoken questions. Why Reed? Why come back like this? You know why. His eyes, once warm with friendship, now burned with something darker. The same reason you've been hunting ghosts all these years. The same reason you're here now, pretending to follow Steele's orders while pursuing your own agenda. Morgan didn't deny it. Steele was there the night my father died. He gave the order. Steele was just a captain then, following orders himself. Reed leaned forward. Blackbird went much higher, Echo, all the way to the top. What is Blackbird? What was my father involved in that got him killed? Reed studied her for a long moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. Your father discovered that certain elements within the intelligence community were running unauthorized operations, assassinations, arms deals, drug trafficking, using military resources for private gain. He was gathering evidence to expose them. And they killed him for it. They branded him a traitor first, made it look like he was the one selling secrets. Reed's voice hardened. Just like they did to me when I got too close to the truth 6 years ago. The pieces were starting to fit together. Kandahar, the mission that went bad. Wasn't bad luck or faulty intelligence. It was a setup. They needed me gone because I'd found the connection between Blackbird and what happened to your father. He picked up his rifle, running his fingers along the barrel with familiar ease. I survived, barely. Spent 2 years recovering in a village near the Pakistan border. By the time I made it back stateside, I was officially dead. The perfect ghost. So you started hunting them, one by one. The people responsible for Blackbird. The ones who ordered your father's death. The ones who left me to die in the desert. He met her gaze evenly. The same people you've been investigating all these years. Morgan felt the truth of his words resonate within her. How many nights had she pored over classified files, searching for connections? How many dead ends had she encountered, blocked by security clearances and redacted documents? "Why didn't you contact me?" She asked the question that had burned in her mind since she'd first suspected Shadow Fox's identity. "We were partners, Reed. Friends. Because I needed to know if you were part of it." His expression softened slightly. "There aren't many people I trust anymore, Echo. But I never stopped believing in you. That's why I left you clues. The medallions. The messages. I knew eventually you'd see the pattern." Morgan lowered her rifle fractionally. "Steele says you're a traitor. A killer who turned against his own. And what do you believe?" The question hung between them, demanding an answer that would define everything that followed. Before she could respond, gunfire erupted outside the bunker. Multiple weapons tactical pattern her team engaging hostiles. Reed was on his feet instantly. "We're out of time. They're here." "Who's here?" Morgan moved to the bunker entrance, scanning the tree line. "Steele's cleanup crew. He knows I've made contact with you. He can't risk us comparing notes." Reed grabbed her arm. "You need to make a choice right now, Echo. Trust me or trust them." Morgan hesitated only for a moment. 6 years of doubt and questions crystallized into certainty. "What's the play?" Reed's grim smile told her she'd made the right choice. "First, we survive. Then we bring the whole thing down around their ears." As they moved toward the bunker exit, planning their next move, Morgan knew she had crossed a line from which there was no return. She was no longer hunting Shadow Fox. She had become his ally in a much more dangerous game. Gunfire erupted through the forest like angry hornets, the sound echoing off concrete bunkers and metal structures. Morgan and Reed moved as 1 year of shared training, creating a synchronicity that needed no words. They took cover behind the thick steel door of the bunker, assessing the situation. 3 teams, Reed said, his experienced ear picking out the distinctive fire patterns. "Standard pincer movement. They're trying to flush us toward the north clearing." Morgan nodded. "Where they'll have a kill zone set up." Through the narrow gap between door and frame, she could see muzzle flashes in the tree-line, professional operators moving with tactical precision. In the distance, she heard Tank and Henderson returning fire their position under heavy assault. "Your team doesn't stand a chance," Reed said, his voice flat. "Steele sent his best cleanup crew. Delta operators most likely, or worse. They're my responsibility." Morgan checked her ammunition. "I brought them into this." Reed's scarred face softened slightly. Still carrying the weight of the world on those small shoulders. He pulled a secondary weapon from his thigh holster and handed it to her. "M9 15 rounds. You'll need it." She took the pistol, their fingers brushing momentarily. "Just like Kandahar. Let's hope the ending's better this time." He gestured toward the rear of the bunker. "There's a drainage tunnel that leads to the east perimeter. We can use it to circle around behind them. And my team, if they're half as good as you've trained them to be, they'll hold their own until we get there." It wasn't ideal, but it was their best option. Morgan keyed her comm unit one last time. "Tank Williams, if you can hear me, fall back to defensive positions. We've got hostiles converging from multiple vectors. I'm moving to flank them from the east." Only static answered her, but she had to believe the message got through, had to trust that Tank would make the right decisions without her direct guidance. The drainage tunnel was narrow and dank, decades of neglect evident in the crumbling concrete and rusted metal supports. They moved quickly, hunched over weapons at the ready. Reed led, navigating with the confidence of someone who had studied the terrain extensively. "You've been planning this for a while," Morgan observed, as they emerged into a small clearing 300 meters east of the main firefight. Reed didn't deny it. "I knew Steele would send you after me eventually. You were always his best hunter." He paused, scanning the area. "Just didn't expect him to move this quickly. Someone must have tipped him off that we made contact." Morgan thought of Williams, stationed at headquarters. Had he reported their conversation about watching Steele? Or was there another leak she hadn't identified? No time to speculate now. The gunfire was intensifying, concentrated around the north section, where Tank and Henderson had been positioned. She and Reed moved toward it, using the dense undergrowth for cover, staying low and silent. They came upon the first of Steele's operators less than a minute later, a black-clad figure with no identifying markings carrying a suppressed M4. Reed took him down with brutal efficiency, a knife across the throat before the man could raise the alarm. Morgan recognized the tactics immediately. These aren't regular military, they're ghost operators. The kind that didn't exist on any official roster deployed for missions that could never be acknowledged. "Blackbird's enforcers," Reed confirmed grimly. "Been hunting me for years." They moved on, working their way toward the sound of heaviest fighting. 2 more operators fell to their silent approach. Morgan noted with professional detachment that these men fought differently from standard special forces. No radio chatter, non-standard weapons configurations, specialized ammunition. This was a kill team, pure and simple. When they reached the north clearing, the scene was chaos. Tank and Henderson had taken cover inside an old guard post surrounded on 3 sides, returning fire with disciplined bursts that spoke to their training. 3 black-clad bodies lay in the open ground, evidence that her team was giving better than they got. But they were pinned down and running out of options. Morgan signaled to Reed, indicating her plan without words. He nodded, moving to a flanking position while she set up her rifle on a fallen log. Through her scope, she counted 5 remaining hostiles converging on the guard post. She took a deep breath, exhaled halfway, and squeezed the trigger. The first operator dropped immediately, a clean shot through the base of the skull. The others reacted instantly, diving for cover, trying to locate the new threat. Reed's rifle barked from the opposite flank, taking down a second man. Caught in the crossfire, the remaining operators split their attention, giving Tank and Henderson the opening they needed. They emerged from cover, laying down suppressive fire that forced the hostiles deeper into defensive positions. Morgan used the comm unit again. "Tank, it's Morgan. 2 friendlies on your 6. We're coming in." This time his voice crackled back through the static. "Copy that. About damn time you showed up to your own party?" She allowed herself a small smile. If Tank was still making jokes, the situation wasn't completely foobar. The remaining operators, realizing they had lost the advantage, began a tactical retreat, moving back toward the main compound in coordinated bounds. Morgan let them go. Pursuit would only lead them into another potential ambush. When she and Reed reached the guard post, Tank's eyes widened at the sight of Shadow Fox, the man they had been hunting, now fighting alongside them. Henderson's weapon came up instinctively. "Stand down," Morgan ordered. "He's with us." "With us?" Henderson's voice was incredulous. "This is the guy who's killed 23 of our people, 23 traitors," Reed corrected, his rifle still scanning the tree line for threats. "And I'm not the enemy here." Tank studied Reed with narrowed eyes, then looked to Morgan. "Somebody want to tell me what the hell is going on? Because last I checked, we were hunting this guy, not teaming up with him. It's complicated, Morgan began, but a sudden burst of gunfire cut her off. Williams stumbled into the clearing, his uniform torn and bloody, pursued by two more black-clad operators. Morgan and Reed reacted simultaneously, their rifles cracking in perfect unison. Both hostiles dropped before they could get off another shot. Williams collapsed against a tree, breathing hard, a nasty graze across his upper arm. They came out of nowhere, ambushed the command post. Captain Richards is dead. Morgan moved to him, checking his wound quickly. Superficial. You'll live. Steele, Williams gasped. It was Steele. He ordered the hit as soon as you left. Said you'd been compromised by the target. Reed gave a humorless laugh. Told you, cleanup crew. Tank looked between them, understanding dawning in his eyes. This was never about hunting. Shadow Fox, was it? This whole mission was a setup. Not exactly, Morgan said, helping Williams to his feet. The mission was real, just not for the reasons Steele claimed. And then enlighten us, Henderson demanded, his weapon still half raised, trust clearly shaken. Because right now, I'm standing in a kill box with a known enemy combatant being shot at by what appear to be our own special forces. Morgan made her decision. They deserved the truth, or at least as much of it as time permitted. The short version, Shadow Fox Reed is a former Delta operator who discovered evidence of a black program called Blackbird. When he got too close to exposing it, they tried to kill him. He survived and started hunting down the people responsible. People like Colonel Steele, Williams said, pieces clicking together in his mind. Exactly. Tank's expression hardened. Like my brother Eric. Reed's attention snapped to Tank. Eric Harrison, 82nd Airborne Sniper. You knew him. I didn't kill him, Reed said, his voice softening slightly. But I know who did. A heavy silence fell over the group as each man processed the implications. Tank's face was a storm of emotions, grief, rage, confusion. We can't stay here, Morgan said, breaking the tension. Steele will send a second wave. We need to move. Where? Henderson asked. If Steele has declared us compromised, we can't go back to base. I know a place, Reed said. An old hunting cabin about 5 miles northeast. Off the grid, well stocked. We can regroup there, treat Williams's wound properly. Morgan nodded. Let's move. We can sort out the rest when we're safe. They set out immediately, moving in tactical formation through the dense forest. Reed took point with Tank and Henderson, flanking Williams, whose injury was beginning to slow him down. Morgan covered their rear, alert for signs of pursuit. As they hiked, Tank fell back to walk beside her. You knew, he said quietly. About Steele. About Reed. About all of it. I suspected, she corrected. But I needed proof. And my brother, did you know about him too? Morgan met his gaze directly. When you mentioned Blackbird, I knew he must have stumbled onto something significant, but I didn't know the details until today. Tank absorbed this, his massive frame tense with conflicting loyalties. So where does that leave us, traitors, deserters? It leaves us with a choice, Morgan said. We can either run and hide, or we can finish what your brother started, what my father started, expose Blackbird and everyone involved in it. His eyes hardened with resolve. Eric was investigating something before he died, something that scared him enough to call me the night before it happened. And now we know why. They walked in silence for a moment before Tank spoke again. Morgan, what exactly is Blackbird? What could be so important that they'd kill their own people to protect it? It was the question that had driven her for 15 years. The question that had shaped her entire existence since that night in Lebanon. But before she could answer, Reed signaled from ahead. "We're here." The cabin was well concealed in a dense copse of pine trees, its weathered exterior blending with the surrounding forest. Inside was sparse but functional medical supplies, preserved food communications equipment and weapons. Reed had prepared this safe house with the thoroughness that had kept him alive for 6 years while officially dead. As Henderson treated Williams's wound, Reed spread a map across a rough wooden table. "We need to move quickly. Once Steele realizes his first team failed, he'll escalate. Probably already has a cover story in place, us going rogue, killing fellow soldiers, the works." "So what's the plan?" Tank asked, checking his remaining ammunition. "We can't exactly walk back into Fort Bragg and arrest a full-bird colonel." "We don't need to," Morgan said. "We just need to get the evidence to the right people." She turned to Reed. "You said Blackbird went all the way to the top. How high?" Reed's expression darkened. "Cabinet level, maybe higher." Williams, his arm now properly bandaged, looked pale. "You're talking about a conspiracy inside the U.S. government." "That's unbelievable," Reed finished for him. "That's why it's worked for so long. No one wants to believe it." "Show them," Morgan said quietly. Reed hesitated, then nodded. He moved to a loose floorboard in the corner of the cabin, prying it up to reveal a hidden compartment. From it, he extracted a metal case. "I've been collecting this for 6 years," he said, opening the case on the table. "Financial records, mission reports, death certificates, names of every person involved in Blackbird operations since 1982. The men gathered around as Reed laid out document after document. Bank transfers to offshore accounts. Classified operation orders for assassinations never authorized by any legitimate chain of command. Shipping manifests for weapons sold to both sides of various conflicts. Drug trafficking operations disguised as counter-narcotics missions. "Christ," Henderson whispered, scanning a page detailing millions in diverted Pentagon funds. "This is treason," Tank finished, his voice hard. "Plain and simple." Morgan examined a photograph of a meeting in Beirut, 1985. Her father was there alongside several high-ranking officials, and in the background, a younger Andrew Steele. "My father discovered this," she said. "He was gathering evidence to expose them when they killed him." "And branded him a traitor," Reed added. "Same playbook they've used for decades. Anyone who threatens to expose Blackbird gets eliminated, their reputation destroyed posthumously." "Like my brother," Tank said. "Like me," Reed confirmed. "When I found the connection between what happened to Michael Morgan in Beirut and other operations with similar patterns, they sent me on a suicide mission in Kandahar. No extraction plan, bad intel, meant to fail." Morgan looked up sharply. "That was our last mission together." Reed nodded. "I was supposed to die. You weren't. They needed you alive with your skills. Steele had plans for you." The implication hit her like a physical blow. "He's been using me all these years, pointing me at targets he wanted eliminated, letting me think I was serving my country. While he groomed you to be Blackbird's next enforcer," Reed finished. The room fell silent as the enormity of the conspiracy settled over them. It wasn't just about a rogue colonel or a black ops program gone bad. It was about a shadow network that had operated with impunity for decades, using the machinery of government for personal profit, eliminating anyone who threatened to expose them. "So what do we do with all this?" Williams finally asked, gesturing to the evidence spread across the table. We take it to someone who can't be bought or intimidated, Morgan said. Someone with the authority to act on it. The Secretary of Defense, Henderson suggested. Reed shook his head. Too risky. We don't know who's compromised at that level. I know someone, Tank said unexpectedly. Brigadier General Howard Maxwell, Inspector General for Special Operations Command. He and Eric served together in Desert Storm. Eric trusted him. Morgan considered this. Would he believe us? He'd look at the evidence, Tank said. That's his job, and he has the authority to launch an official investigation that even Steele couldn't easily shut down. It's a start, Reed agreed. But getting to him won't be easy. By now, Steele will have all of us flagged as armed and dangerous. Every checkpoint, every base security system will be looking for us. Then we don't use checkpoints, Morgan said. We go in the way no one expects, right through the front door in plain sight. She outlined her plan quickly. It was audacious, dangerous, and their only real option. They would split into two teams. Reed and Henderson would secure their escape route and backup position. Morgan, Tank, and Williams would infiltrate Fort Bragg during the shift change using Tank's access to reach General Maxwell's office. If we don't make contact within 3 hours, assume we've been compromised, Morgan concluded. Reed, you take the evidence and get it to the fallback contact. Reed didn't like it. She could see it in his eyes, but he nodded. 3 hours, not a minute more. As they prepared to move out, Reed pulled Morgan aside. Echo, he said quietly, using her old call sign. Be careful. Steele is desperate now, and desperate men are the most dangerous. I know. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and handed her a small object, a worn brass compass. You remember? She did. He'd given it to her on their first mission together when she'd been fresh out of sniper school and unsure of herself. Find your way home, he'd told her. I kept it, he said. All these years. Morgan closed her fingers around it. I'll see you in 3 hours. Count on it. They moved out as dusk began to settle over the forest, each carrying what they needed for their respective missions. The plan was straightforward, but dangerous, a direct infiltration into what was now hostile territory for them. The drive to Fort Bragg was tense, each checkpoint a potential trap. But Morgan's assessment of the base security proved accurate. The evening shift change created just enough confusion for them to slip through with borrowed IDs and the right authorizations mumbled into radio comms. Once inside, they moved with purpose, dressed in clean uniforms borrowed from a laundry facility outside the base. No one questioned 3 soldiers walking with determination toward the administration building. In a base the size of Fort Bragg, faces blurred together, and their confident stride suggested they belonged. General Maxwell's office was on the 3rd floor, at the end of a corridor, monitored by a single aide, a young lieutenant who looked up in surprise as they approached. The general isn't expecting visitors, he began. Tank stepped forward. Sergeant James Harrison, 82nd Airborne. I need to speak with General Maxwell immediately. It concerns my brother, Captain Eric Harrison. The mention of Eric's name had the desired effect. The lieutenant's expression shifted to one of recognition and sympathy. The general was at his memorial service. Let me see if he's available. A moment later, they were ushered into a spacious office where Brigadier General Howard Maxwell stood behind his desk. He was a tall, imposing figure with silver hair and the weathered face of a career soldier who had seen more than his share of combat. Sergeant Harrison, he said, his voice a gravelly baritone, this is unexpected. His eyes shifted to Morgan and Williams, taking in their appearances with a practiced assessment. And you've brought friends. Sir, Tank began, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible, but I ask that you hear us out completely before making any decisions. Maxwell studied them for a long moment, then gestured to the chairs in front of his desk. "All right, Sergeant. You have 5 minutes." Those 5 minutes turned into 30 as they laid out the basics of what they had discovered: Blackbird Steele's involvement, the attempted ambush at the munitions depot, the evidence Reed had compiled. They didn't mention Reed's current status or location, keeping that card in reserve. When they finished, Maxwell sat in silence, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "That's quite a story. One that, if true, represents the most significant breach of military ethics and criminal conspiracy I've encountered in 30 years of service." "It's true, sir," Morgan said. "We have the evidence? I'd like to see it." "It's secure, sir. We can retrieve it, but we need assurances." Maxwell's eyes narrowed slightly. "What kind of assurances, Sergeant Morgan?" "That this will be handled through proper channels. That the evidence won't disappear. That the people involved won't be protected by their rank or connections." "You're asking me to promise that justice will be served," Maxwell said. "Yes, sir, I am." Maxwell stood and walked to the window, looking out over the base. "I knew your brother Harrison. He was a good man, a patriot in the truest sense." He turned back to face them. "And I've heard rumors about Operation Blackbird for years. Whispers, nothing more. Never enough to justify an official investigation." He returned to his desk and pressed a button on his phone. "Lieutenant, I need a secure line to the Judge Advocate General immediately, and clear my schedule for the next 3 hours." To Morgan and the others, he said, "Get your evidence. I'll have my staff prepare a secure room where we can review it properly. This stays between us until I've verified your claims." It was more than they had hoped for. As they left to rendezvous with Reed, Morgan felt the first real stirring of hope. The system might work after all, if the right people were willing to make it work. Reed and Henderson were waiting at the arranged meeting point, a storage facility just outside the base perimeter. The evidence was transferred to a secure briefcase, and they returned to General Maxwell's office through a side entrance, avoiding the main security checkpoints. For the next 2 hours, Maxwell reviewed the documents Reed had compiled, his expression growing increasingly grim. When he finally looked up, his eyes were hard with resolve. "This goes beyond criminal," he said. "This is a direct threat to national security and the integrity of our entire military structure." He picked up his phone. "I'm activating a special investigative team from outside Steele's chain of command. This needs to be handled carefully by the book, with every I dotted and T crossed." "And Colonel Steele," Morgan asked, "will be detained and questioned effective immediately." Before Maxwell could make the call, his office door burst open. Colonel Andrew Steele stood in the doorway, flanked by 4 armed military police officers. "General Maxwell," Steele said smoothly, "I apologize for the interruption, but these individuals are wanted for questioning in relation to an incident at the training grounds this morning. 3 dead, 2 wounded." Maxwell's expression didn't change. "Is that so, Colonel? Interesting timing." "Sir, I was just reviewing some rather disturbing evidence concerning Operation Blackbird." Maxwell nodded toward the documents spread across his desk. "Evidence that suggests you've been running an unauthorized black ops program for personal profit, among other serious charges." Steele's composure slipped for just a moment, a flicker of shock crossing his face, before the mask returned. "Sir, with respect, you've been misled. These individuals have fabricated original documents with your signature," Maxwell cut in. "Financial records with your account numbers, mission reports detailing operations never authorized through proper channels." He shook his head. "I don't think so, Colonel." The MPs looked uncertain, glancing between Maxwell and Steele, awaiting clear orders. Steele's hand moved subtly toward his sidearm. "General, this is a misunderstanding that I'm sure we can—" "Stand down, Colonel," Maxwell ordered, his voice hardening. "That's a direct order." For a tense moment, it seemed Steele might defy the order. His eyes darted to Morgan, to the evidence on the desk, to the exits. Calculating odds, evaluating options. "MPs," Maxwell said calmly, "Colonel Steele is hereby relieved of duty pending investigation into serious allegations of misconduct. Please escort him to the detention facility." The senior MP hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Yes, sir." As they moved to take Steele into custody, he lunged suddenly, drawing his weapon with practiced speed. "This isn't over," he snarled, backing toward the door gun trained on Maxwell. Morgan moved without thinking, her body responding with the instincts honed through years of combat. She charged Steele, deflecting his arm upward as the weapon discharged the bullet, embedding itself in the ceiling. Her momentum carried them both into the hallway, where they crashed against the opposite wall. Steele was strong, experienced, fighting with the desperation of a man who knew he had nothing left to lose. But Morgan had youth speed and the cold precision that had made her Ghost 7. They grappled briefly before she locked his arm in a joint manipulation that sent his weapon clattering to the floor. Tank and the MPs were there a moment later, subduing Steele completely. As they secured him, Steele locked eyes with Morgan. "I made you," he hissed. "Everything you are, every skill you have, it was all for Blackbird. For us." "No," she replied evenly. "What I am, I made myself. In spite of you, not because of you." The MPs led Steele away, his final glare promising retribution that would never come. Maxwell appeared in the doorway, surveying the aftermath with a grim expression. "Well," he said dryly, "that answers any lingering questions about guilt." The next 48 hours passed in a blur of debriefings, sworn statements, and evidence cataloging. General Maxwell kept his word, ensuring that the investigation proceeded by the book, with oversight from the highest levels of the Pentagon. Additional arrests were made as more names from Reed's evidence were verified and located. Morgan and her team were granted provisional protective custody, not prisoners, but not free to leave the base either. Their status remained complicated, a problem that would take time and legal maneuvering to fully resolve. On the third day, Morgan was summoned to Maxwell's office. She found him standing by the window, watching the activity on the parade ground below. "Quite a mess we've uncovered, Sergeant," he said without turning. 37 arrests so far, with more coming. Officials in 3 branches of government, 2 generals, a deputy director at the CIA. He shook his head. Blackbird's tentacles reached further than anyone imagined. Morgan said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "The question now is what to do with you and your team." He turned to face her. "Technically, you went AWOL, engaged in unsanctioned combat operations on U.S. soil, and conspired with a man officially designated as an enemy combatant." "Technically," she agreed. A faint smile touched Maxwell's lips. "Fortunately, the JAG office has a rather elegant solution. Given the extraordinary circumstances and the service you've rendered in exposing this conspiracy, they're prepared to overlook certain procedural irregularities. And Marcus Reed presents a more complex problem. Officially, he's been dead for 6 years. His actions during that time, while arguably justified in light of what we now know, still resulted in the deaths of military personnel. Men who were complicit in Blackbird, Morgan pointed out. Yes, but that determination needs to be made through proper legal channels, not vigilante justice. Maxwell sighed. That said, the current thinking is that it might be best for all concerned if Marcus Reed remained officially deceased. Morgan understood the implication. Reed would not face charges, but he could never reclaim his identity or return to his former life either. There is another option, Maxwell continued. We're forming a special investigative unit to continue unraveling Blackbird's operations and identifying all involved parties. This unit will require individuals with unique skill sets and personal motivation to see the job through. You want me to join this unit? I want you to lead it, Sergeant Morgan. Or should I say Warrant Officer Morgan? The promotion paperwork is already being processed. The offer was unexpected, but not unwelcome. A chance to continue the work her father had started to dismantle Blackbird completely, to ensure nothing like it could ever take root again. What about my team? Those who wish to join you are welcome. Those who prefer to return to their regular duties will do so with commendations and no black marks on their records. Morgan considered the proposal. It wasn't perfect, nothing in the real world ever was, but it was a path forward, a chance to serve with purpose and integrity. I accept, she said, on one condition, which is Reed. I want him as a consultant to the unit. His knowledge of Blackbird is unparalleled, and we'll need his expertise to track down the remaining operatives. Maxwell studied her for a long moment. You trust him that much? With my life, she said simply. Very well. I'll make the arrangements. He extended his hand. Welcome to Operation Daybreak, Warrant Officer Morgan. 6 months later, Morgan stood at the edge of the Arlington National Cemetery, watching as a small group gathered around a freshly installed headstone. The ceremony was modest, a family saying goodbye to a son and brother who had died serving his country. Eric Harrison was finally receiving the recognition he deserved. His name cleared, his service honored. Tank stood beside his parents and Eric's widow, who cradled their infant daughter, the child Eric had never lived to see. Morgan kept her distance, respecting the family's privacy. Her presence here was unofficial, a personal pilgrimage rather than a formal duty. When the ceremony concluded and the family departed, she approached the grave alone, placing a single white rose on the headstone. We finished it, she said quietly. Your brother made sure of that. A figure materialized beside her, Reed, wearing civilian clothes and sunglasses, his scarred face partially hidden by a carefully trimmed beard. He looked different enough from his military days that few would connect him to the man officially declared dead years ago. You shouldn't be here, she said, though there was no real admonishment in her tone. Too risky. Some things are worth the risk. He gazed at the headstone. He was a good man, like your father. They stood in silence for a moment, honoring the dead and acknowledging the cost of the truth they had exposed. Blackbird was finished, its architects facing justice, its operations dismantled. But the price had been too high for many. Daybreak's making progress, Morgan said finally. 3 more arrests yesterday. Former CIA deputy director rolled on his contacts in South America. The money trail, leading to offshore accounts in the Caymans, were close to the source. Reed nodded, satisfied. This was why he had agreed to Maxwell's arrangement to see the job through to the end, to ensure that every last person involved in Blackbird answered for their crimes. As they walked back toward the cemetery gates, Reed asked, How's the team? Good. Tank's running field operations now. Williams made sergeant last month. Henderson's heading up our communications division. And you, how's command treating you? Morgan considered the question. The transition from operator to leader hadn't been easy. She was more comfortable behind a scope than behind a desk, more suited to action than administration. But she was learning, adapting as she always had. It has its moments, she admitted. Still prefer the field, but this way I can make sure things are done right. They reached her car, an unmarked government sedan with tinted windows. Before getting in, she turned to Reed. Maxwell's approved your request. The safe house in Montana. When this is over, it is yours, new identity, Clean background, everything you need to start over. Something like hope flickered across Reed's scarred features. And you? The question hung between them, weighted with history and possibility. One step at a time, she said. First we finish Blackbird, then we'll see. It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't a refusal either. Just an acknowledgement that the future remained unwritten, that choices still lay ahead. As Reed disappeared into the crowd, Morgan slid behind the wheel, checking her secure phone for updates from the task force. Another lead to follow, another piece of the puzzle to place. The work continued methodical and relentless. She thought of her father, of the promise she'd made in that blood-soaked house in Beirut. I'll find who did this. I'll make it right. After 15 years, she was finally fulfilling that vow. The most dangerous person in the room isn't always the one making the most noise. Sometimes, it's the one no one notices until it's too late. The quiet one. The watcher. The ghost who remembers what justice truly means. Morgan started the engine and pulled away from the cemetery, her mind already turning to the next mission. The hunt wasn't over yet, but for the first time in years, she could see its end on the horizon. And beyond that, perhaps something she had never allowed herself to imagine, a future. The end.